Great. Thank you so much, Dean Rodacker. And thank you all for joining us. As Dean Rodacker mentioned, my name is David Baluarte. I'm the Associate Dean for Academic Affairs at W&L, and I'm joined in this session by three of my colleagues, Professors J.D. King, Cary Shelby, and Allison Weiss. Structure for this session, just to give you a brief overview, we thought that we would each briefly introduce ourselves. Dean Rodacker was kind enough to circulate our bios, but you might appreciate hearing a little bit about us from us. And then we were going to move on to provide an overview of the curriculum, both sort of giving you a snapshot of what the 3 years are like at W&L, and then each participant on the panel will give a little bit more insight from his or her own personal perspective. So in that spirit, I'll just start with a brief introduction. As I mentioned, I'm the Associate Dean for Academic Affairs, which means that I am currently in the role of the administrator, helping the dean to manage our academic program, ensuring quality and developing cutting-edge academic offerings for our students. I'm actually relatively new to this role. This has been my first year in the Associate Dean's position. I came to W&L 7 years ago to direct the Immigrant Rights Clinic, which is something that I continue to do. I also have taught a variety of courses, transnational law in the first year, immigration law is an upper level course, also a human rights practicum. My research and my research interests really overlap with my teaching. I write principally in the area of stateless people and refugees. And then broadly, I research about the intersection between international law and domestic migration. I'll pass it on to Professor King next to give an introduction.
Thanks, David. I'm J.D. King, and I before I started teaching, I was a public defender in D.C. I was there for about 7 years doing that, and I teach criminal procedure and evidence and professional responsibility at W&L. And I also run the Criminal Justice Clinic, which is a clinic that I started when I first got to W&L some years ago. And what that is it's a program for third-year law students who can go into court and, under my supervision, represent folks who are charged with misdemeanors. So we go into various courthouses around the area in Lexington and nearby towns. People charged with assault and shoplifting and various other misdemeanors. And in that clinic, the students run the show. Well, you know, the students run the cases. They've got the primary professional responsibility for all the cases, get to interview the clients and talk to the witnesses and do all the legal research, and then conduct the trial. And so that's a lot of fun for me, and it builds on my prior work as a public defender. I've been at W&L for 12 years now. I've been doing that ever since I got here. I write about criminal defense, indigent defense systems and public defenders and criminal adjudication. And I'm also the director of experiential education right now. So I help to take care of the clinical offerings and externships and the various other experiential offerings that you'll hear a little bit about today, including some of these new hybrid courses that involve some work with actual clients while being supervised by an in-house faculty member.
Great. Professor Shelby?
Greetings and welcome. My name is Cary Martin Shelby. I actually just finished my first academic year here at W&L, but I've been in academia for close to 10 years. I teach a variety of business law courses such as business association, securities regulation, and corporate finance. I also teach a 1L course, which I'll talk briefly about today, which is contracts. In terms of my research, I primarily focus on investment funds. And so the problem that I've been investigating over the past 10 years or so is the increasing publicness of private funds. And so I've written a series of law review articles on this problem, I've recently written about social impact investing and the extent to which that is encroaching upon publicness, even though it's operating in the private sphere. My research is very much related to my practice experience. And so prior to academia, I was a hedge fund for close to 4 years at Sidley Austin in Chicago, where we represented a variety of investment fund or primarily private fund clients, such as hedge funds, commodity pools, private equity funds. And so it was a really exciting practice, and I make every effort to integrate my practice experience with both my research as well as my teaching.
Great, thank you. Professor Weiss.
Yes, hi everyone. I'm so glad to be doing this virtually. My name is Allison Weiss, and I have taught at Washington and Lee now for 2 years. I'm just completing my 2nd year, so a relative newbie. And I mainly teach legal writing. So that is a 1L course that is offered and required at every law school. You will all have the opportunity to take legal writing, and you are lucky, because legal writing is a great class. So a little bit about, which I will talk more about, and clearly I'm excited about, but a little bit about me. Prior to coming to Washington and Lee, I spent the majority of my legal career working in federal courts. So most recently, I was working for the Western District of Virginia with their prisoner docket. So individuals who are incarcerated and filing habeas claims with the court. Prior to that, I worked for a judge in the Eastern District of North Carolina. Before that, I worked for a judge on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in Portland, Oregon. So I have spent a lot of time in a lot of different courts. I also worked for a number of years with the federal public defenders in the Western District of North Carolina. And I taught law school for 1 year at Campbell. So I've done a lot of different things, but every job that I've had has been really focused on legal writing and research. It's what I love, and it's what I teach.
Wonderful. Thank you, Professor Weiss. So before we move into the Q&A, as I mentioned earlier, we'd like to give just an overview of the curriculum. I'm going to take a couple of minutes just to give you a snapshot of the 3 years at W&L, and then each of my colleagues will spend a few minutes talking about talking about the various offerings that they're involved with. Then we'll move into the Q&A. I have a number of questions that you've already sent to Dean Rodacker, and we're happy to take questions on the call as well. So the 3 years at W&L have sort of a logical progression in our mind. The first year is really dedicated to teaching you how to think like a lawyer through some core doctrinal law subjects. You'll take contracts, perhaps with Professor Shelby, as she mentioned, or torts, or civil procedure, or criminal law, these core doctrinal law subjects. And the goal there is to teach you about the law, but of course to teach you how to analyze problems like a lawyer. In addition to those courses, the courses that you'll find at a lot of law schools, we also teach transnational law in the first year. As I mentioned, I've taught that for a few years. That's essentially international law designed specifically for 1Ls, again, to follow on our commitment to educate global lawyers at W&L. In addition to these core doctrinal subjects, as Professor Weiss mentioned, you'll take legal writing and research throughout your first year. And that is really a key offering that teaches you how to communicate the different subjects and the concepts of the law that you're learning in the classroom into writing, which is one of the most important ways that lawyers communicate. After the first year, in the second and third year, you take a variety of upper level courses that I would just sort of describe in 3 ways. You have required upper level courses. such as professional responsibility and evidence. And Professor King mentioned he teaches both of those subjects. You also have elective upper level courses. So as I mentioned, I teach immigration law as an elective. Professor King teaches criminal procedure. And Professor Shelby, as she mentioned, teaches a wide range of business law courses, from business associations to securities regulation to corporate finance and others. We also have a robust set of experiential offerings in the upper level. And these really range from clinics. Again, I mentioned that I direct the Immigrant Rights Clinic and Professor King directs the Criminal Justice Clinic. We also have a wide variety of practicum courses. Professor Weiss also teaches a rights of prisoners practicum drawn directly from her experience in the federal courts. These courses that we offer in a wide variety of substantive and practice areas are designed to use simulated problems in many cases to help students develop the skills of lawyering that they're going to need in practice. And this is an area that we have really committed to at W&L and developed a robust and exciting curriculum that you'll hear more about from my colleagues. And so I'm going to pass it on to my colleagues, again, moving in alphabetical order, starting with Professor J.D. King.
Sure. So I teach a couple different of those categories. Like David said, I teach evidence, which is one of only two, I guess, required upper level courses, evidence and professional responsibility. So I teach both of those. And I try in both of those classes to bring in, not only the theoretical stuff from the cases and the doctrine, but also some practical understanding. And like I said, prior to this, I work as a trial lawyer in criminal defense. And so I try to bring that in, both in teaching evidence and in teaching criminal procedure, professional responsibility. And then, David sort of described this progression. By the third year, for most of our students, mainly what you're taking is experiential courses, whether they're clinics, these practicum courses, externships, things like that. And the idea of those, and this is what David said W&L is really invested in and was really on the front edge of this curve 10 or 12 years ago, was really putting the students in the role of lawyer when they're in these classes. And so well, I'll let Allison talk about her practicum course, but in my clinic, what I said, the students have the primary professional responsibility. And the idea is that the hardest thing to teach in law school, and so the thing we focus on, in the upper level, is that thinking like a lawyer, not thinking like a student, which that's important too, but figuring out what the law is. But when you're acting as a lawyer in role, either when you're actually representing a client, as you would in one of the clinics, or you're in a simulation, as you are in some of our practicum courses, that's the harder, sort of higher level thinking, creativity, and strategy that we really get at, we think, most effectively through some of these experiential courses. We have plenty of traditional courses, and my criminal procedure course I'm teaching now is more what you'd think of as a traditional law school course. We get together twice a week in a classroom, and I talk about cases and ask students questions and Socratic method, and we have an exam. There's nothing wrong with that. I like those classes too. But the clinics and the experiential ones is what maybe sets W&L apart a little bit from some of the other schools, and especially the wide range of subject matter that we have available in those. I can talk more specifically about the specific offerings maybe later in the Q&A, but we've got 6 in-house clinics across a wide variety of subject matters, each taught by a member of our faculty. But then we've also got a range of externships, prosecution externship, a judicial externship, an externship in DC, and then a sort of a general externship. Then we've got some transnational courses. David mentioned the human rights practicum. This is where you'd be working with nonprofit organizations in other countries, or governmental agencies in other countries. So you get and you'll be able to pick from this tempting menu of courses across all the subject matter.
Thank you, Professor King. Professor Shelby, you'd like to share a bit of your experience with the students?
Absolutely. So I'll begin by briefly talking about my teaching philosophy. So I firmly believe in making every effort to make the law more accessible to a wide range of students. And so what does that mean exactly? So for me, that means providing more opportunities for feedback. So what's distinguishable about my class is that I have at least 2 additional in-class assignments where I provide direct feedback, direct written feedback to the students, and then we discuss the problems in class. And so having that feedback early on prior to the exams makes it so that I can ensure that the students are all on track. Making the law more accessible also means that I rely heavily on visual aids and diagrams, particularly when the fact pattern gets a little bit more complicated, which frequently occurs in some of the upper level business law courses that I teach. I also have a lot of fun with incorporating real life examples into the topics that we cover in our classes. And so I'm constantly and obsessively reading the news, reading about different events that are occurring that are relevant to my class. And then I also try to connect contracts in all of my business law courses to other classes that the students may be taking so that they could think more broadly about the law, generally speaking. And so that's like my broad teaching philosophy. I could talk briefly about contracts at this juncture. And so contracts is really just a survey course that covers the general principles and laws that apply to contracts. That's really, really broad. I kick off the class by talking about the various contracts that we may have encountered that day. And so my favorite coffee shop in Lexington is Pronto's, and I get an extremely strong drink, no judgment, from this coffee shop every single day when I'm teaching class. And so I discuss all of the contracts that I entered into just by virtue of purchasing coffee. And then we delve into some of the theoretical frameworks that apply to how contracts should be governed. There's the classical theory of contracts, for example, and there's really a formula that was developed by the author of the casebook that I use to govern the entire structure of the course, in that a contract equals mutual assent, which is offer plus acceptance plus consideration minus the absence of any defenses. And so having that broad or that formula really helps to guide the students in organizing the material. And so we spend quite a bit of time talking about the extent to which a communication rises to the level of offer, which empowers another party to actually accept the offer. Then you have a legally enforceable promise if in fact there's consideration. But what about all of these defenses? What if a minor entered into the contract? What if the person was legally incapacitated for some reason or the other? And so I really have a lot of fun in this class. And again, I think it's essential to try to connect these concepts to real life issues. And this is similar to what my colleague just discussed, Professor King, just about the importance of learning how to think like a lawyer. So while I do rely on the Socratic method, I also provide quite a bit of time during class to have discussions and rely on volunteers to solicit participation to really see how the students are perceiving some of the laws that we discussed at length.
Thank you so much. So I don't know about you all, but I want to take contracts again with Professor Shelby. Thank you so much for that description.
And I'll say that Pronto is 100% the best place to get coffee in Lexington. So
fantastic.
Write that down.
I also, I should say, would like to take legal writing with Professor Weiss, and you'll hear more about why right now.
Great. Okay, so unlike the doctrinal courses that Professor Shelby and Professor King have been talking about, contracts, where you're learning about the components of contracts and what makes a contract binding, or criminal law, what is a crime, how should we be looking at the criminal justice system, Legal writing is a very different beast. It is the only skills-based course that you will take your first year. It spans the entire year. So you are with the same students. It's a small class, about 20, ranging from 20 to 22 students usually in your class, and you have that same class for the entire year. So it's also the only class that you have that, other than research, legal research, that spans the entire year. And what we do in legal writing is we write. We read cases, we think about cases, and we write about cases. And while that might not sound really exciting, it is in fact amazing. And the reason is because, you know, as Professor Shelby and Professor King have mentioned, being a lawyer entails being able to think like a lawyer. It also requires writing, no matter what position or job you have, whether it is more transactional or business, as Professor Shelby's prior work was, or criminal, or, I mean, no matter what your job is after law school, you will be writing. And in order to write effectively, you have to be able to think effectively. Sorry, I've got my children at home, and one has just come into the room and walked out again. Okay, we're good. So sorry. These are the realities of Zoom time. So in any case, back again to legal writing. And my kids also are getting this because, you know, now that I'm spending a lot more time at home, we're talking a lot about the news and cases, and I'm trying to get my 10-year-old to think logically and write paragraphs in a way that makes sense from a legal perspective. So there's that as well. But what you will be doing as, you know, law students and not as a 10-year-old is really composing legal analysis, legal documents, and that requires you to be able to think like a lawyer, to think logically, to assess case law and analyze it. And that is what being a lawyer really is, and it is really fun. It's, you know, putting puzzle pieces together. So in the fall, we focus on objective writing, memo writing, the kind of work that you will do in a law firm where you're asked to analyze a particular problem from a more objective standpoint and not arguing from your client's perspective. In the spring, we segue into persuasive writing. So you then have a client, you know, a pretend client that you are, you know, advocating for. And so your writing changes because it becomes much more slanted towards the position that you are advocating. But overall, the skills are the same, which is that you need to rely on case law, on statutes and court decisions to support your arguments and to make logical analysis and discussions. And so that spans the entire year. And, you know, we do a number of, you know, activities. So you have major assignments that you write in the fall and in the spring, but in class, unlike in doctrinal classes where you're reading cases and discussing them, we spend a lot of time actually writing. So you have, you know, assignments that you do in class, write emails, short analyses, you know, discussions with classmates. It's a very interactive class where you are putting the skills that you are learning with regard to legal writing and legal analysis to work. So that's what legal writing is about for first years.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Professor Weiss. So now we're going to move into the Q&A portion of this session. I have a number of questions that you all shared with Dean Rodacker before the session. I also want to give folks on this call the opportunity to ask questions. So maybe what I'll do is I'll move back and forth, encourage you to write any questions in the chat box. Dean Rodacker, you're going to be able to monitor that. And I'll start with some of the questions that you sent in advance. Dean Rodacker, does that sound like a good approach?
That sounds perfect. Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful. So one of the first questions that we got, and I'm going to address this one, was about international law opportunities at W&L. And I want to talk a bit about this because I think that one of the remarkable things about W&L, which is a fairly small school in a fairly rural area, is that it is incredibly engaged with the world. And it's engaged with the world both through sort of the curriculum, a variety of classes that we've developed, through faculty members. We have a remarkable number of internationalists on our relatively small faculty. And really importantly, a wide range of practical opportunities to get students out of Lexington, even out of the United States, and sort of engaging in the practice of international law, if you will, around the world. And so just briefly, I think that and I mentioned this at the outset, we really try to signal to students by having one of our first year required courses as transnational law. We're really signaling to students that this is a commitment that we make to our students and that we really want to follow up on with our curriculum. So transnational law is a course that you take in the spring alongside criminal law and constitutional law. And in transnational law, you're really, you're learning a lot of international public law, but what you're often doing in this course is you're connecting international law frameworks to a lot of the domestic substantive law areas that you're learning. So for example, transnational law is taught by one of the professors who also teaches constitutional law, and he's a comparative constitutionalist. Similarly, transnational law is taught by a professor who also teaches contracts, and he talks a lot about making contracts across borders. And so that idea, I think, in the first year is important, and we follow through in the upper level as well. We have the German Law Journal, which is one of 3 journals that we have, which is managed by the comparative constitutional scholar that I mentioned that teaches transnational law and con law in the first year. And that's an opportunity for students to engage with scholarly projects from people around the world in putting together each issue of the German Law Journal. We have an exciting array of practicum courses. The Human Rights Practicum takes students to Tanzania to work with a women's rights organization in Tanzania. They do fact-finding and develop human rights reports that assist that organization in public advocacy. We also have an international antitrust practicum. We have an international business transactions course. And we have an anti-corruption practicum that takes students to Ukraine, that takes students to Albania to engage with governments in those countries in developing anti-corruption practices. All of this happening at a relatively small school with a relatively small faculty, but with a big commitment to international law. So that was one of the first questions that I wanted to address. So here's a question that was just chatted to Dean Rodacker about how I can prepare for legal writing or other courses in advance, or would you recommend waiting would you recommend waiting for the dean's email? A little awkward, my apologies. The question was, what can you do to prepare for legal writing in advance? And I think I would even frame that question more broadly to all of my faculty panelists. Is there anything that you would recommend that students are doing to prepare for law school more generally, whether it's legal writing or any of the courses that you're teaching? Maybe we'll start, again, going in the same order with Professor King.
I don't think there's anything you need to do at this point to prepare for law school. You've already been preparing for law school. The only thing I would say is think about why you want to go to law school, which I'm sure you've all already done. But I certainly don't think there's like some book you need to read over the summer or some practice you need to be doing. You're embarking on a really exciting adventure, and I think like any adventure, reflect on why you want to do it and what you want to get out of it. But again, I'm sure you all have already done that. I don't know, maybe my colleagues will have some better advice than that, but that's my advice.
I think that's great advice. Professor Shelby, do you have anything to add?
I wholeheartedly agree with that advice, because starting law school is like starting this clean slate. It's this equalizer in that it's completely different than anything else you have experienced up to this point. And so it is really difficult to prepare for this extremely unique experience. And legal writing is completely unique. It is nothing like writing creatively, although you can be creative in terms of thinking about how to solve complicated problems, but you have to do so within a structure that has to be taught. And so it's hard to prepare for that over the summer. I will say that if you don't have like any lawyers in your background, it can help to at least read. And unfortunately, I can't recommend which supplement, right? There are these W&L preparation books to at least get familiar with certain terms such as black letter law, or what is an outline, what is common law, what are statutes. And that sounds really, really basic, but it really helps to at least have an understanding of these really core basic terms before starting law school. And you will get exposure to that during orientation and things of that nature, but once classes start, the pace moves relatively quickly. And that's all I have to add.
Professor Weiss, anything to add?
I would agree with my colleagues for sure. There is nothing that you need, in my opinion, that you need to be doing prior to coming to law school to really, that you need to do in order to ease the way in. Law school, as Professor Shelby has said, is different, and the pace is intense, and classes are intense. But that's how the degree is structured so that you are learning everything that you need to learn in the 3 years that you are attending law school. My only advice would be to really, read maybe some books that are really interesting to you. Like Just Mercy is one that, is amazing. And Brian Stevenson just talked, he was the commencement speaker last year. And, and that in no way is going to prepare you for your legal classes. But I think that if you can find books that make you excited about the prospect of becoming a lawyer, that is, something that is always worthwhile and interesting, and gives you a perspective on what it is that lawyers do once, that what you all could potentially be doing in 3 years' time. So that's my only advice.
I think that's all great advice. Dean Rodacker mentioned in the chat that we have compiled a list of possible summer reading before you start law school that we circulate to students, so that you get sort of the wisdom of a number of people on faculty. And there are some supplements in there. Again, my personal advice would resonate much more with the advice of my faculty co-panelists, that I think what's really important is to get excited and inspired about the law. And so reading that you can do that is going to help you start the important process of developing a professional identity. Where do you want to make your contribution? You're going to spend long, challenging hours in this reading room behind me, poring over thick books that are going to tell you everything you need to know about the law. And what you really need to find before you get here is the inspiration to engage in the long hours of study back in this room. And I do think that's an important part of law school. I actually have another question here from Dean Rodacker from one of the students. Really interested to hear more about research opportunities that students can get involved with at W&L. There are a wide variety of ways for students to engage in research through journals, with faculty members. I'll let my faculty co-panelists talk about some of the ways that they work with students or that students work on research. Again, can we start with Professor King?
Sure. Yeah, so one way, I always hire 1 or 2 research assistants for the stuff that I'm writing. And like I said, I write about criminal adjudication and fairness and things like that. And so I always have at least one, but usually a couple research assistants working with me. In addition to that, the journals, like Professor Shelby was talking about how if you don't have sort of people in your family or you're not steeped in knowledge of what lawyers do and what law school is, you'll figure that out soon enough. I went to law school, I had no idea what law review meant. And I heard all these people talking about law review. And I sort of had to scramble my first year to figure out what that meant. But it's great. There are these journals, right? The Law Review is one, and then we've got a Journal of Civil Rights and Social Justice, and then we've got the German Law Journal. And so in each of these, not only are you getting to read other, established scholars' work and edit that, but you're also able to write a student note. And so you pick in your second year, you pick a topic that's interesting to you and do some legal research, and you're able to create your own piece of scholarship that can get published in these journals. And so, that's a really exciting thing to do. And as a part of that, we all supervise these student notes. And so every year I've got 3 or 4 students who are not doing my research, but I'm helping them with their research, right? And so it's whatever topics they're interested in. If you've got some interest in, hedge fund regulation, you certainly wouldn't come to me. If you did, I'd send you right down to Professor Shelby. If you wanted to write about the 6th Amendment, she'd send you to me. And so you get to work with faculty in that way too, which is a really exciting thing to do. And something, when I was in your position going to law school, I don't think I'd ever heard the words law review. But when I got to law school, I did that, and I had a lot of fun with it. And now I enjoy working with students from this side of things.
Professor Shelby, would you like to tell us about research opportunities in hedge funds?
Absolutely. I had a phenomenal research assistant this past semester, and she really helped me to take my project to the finish line. And so she helped me with a variety of tasks, such as blue booking and helping me to find additional sources. I gave her several discrete research topics. And let me just take the conversation a step back. For those of you who are interested in research opportunities, in particular in being an RA for a professor, I highly recommend developing those relationships early on. And what's nice about the W&L community is that the professors tend to have an open door policy. We are very much engaged with our students. And so in my humble opinion, it's easier to establish those relationships with your professors in this community. And so engage with your professors, even if it's just to say hello, even if you don't have specific questions, because it makes it easier to be selected as an RA if the professors actually know who you are. And so I have relied heavily on research assistants. I've retained the same RA for the summer, and I plan to hire an additional RA for a book project that I'm working on. Another option is developing an independent research project where you can actually earn credit for a research project that you've developed, and you would do this under the supervision of a faculty member. Law review, I highly recommend similar to Professor King, I had no idea what a law review was. And it's confusing because I didn't know if review was like a verb or a noun or what was happening with that term. But you quickly learn. And I was on, so when I went to Northwestern in Chicago for law school, and I was on there was an international business law journal that I was on, and it was essential. Like, it really piqued my interest in academia. I had a great time actually developing a research project. I learned a ton reading the submissions from law professors. And what is so exciting, and here's what I had no idea entering into law school. As a student on law review, you actually have the power to select which articles get published that are submitted by professors. This is like mind-blowing to me that students have this power. And so now as a professor, I am beholden to students and hoping that they select my article for publications. And so, or for publications. So you actually have quite a bit of power if in fact you are interested in law review.
Wonderful. Professor Weiss, do you have anything to add?
Yes, I just a few things. So I think something that's special about Washington and Lee is that there is a lot of opportunities for mentorship. So, you know, Professors King and Shelby said that they didn't know what law review is, and I didn't either coming in. I don't have lawyers in my family. So if you are in a situation where you don't know something, there is a whole mentorship program that is established, the Curtis Fellows, who are there so that when you say, I have no idea what this means, like, what is a practicum? You know, I remember, you know, a Zoom meeting way back when and orientation, but like, what is that? You know, you have somebody who's there who can really explain these things to you. In the legal writing context, we have something called Burke's Scholars who help not with legal research in the traditional sense of, you know, they're not helping me write law review articles, but they are helping me develop you know, memos and the briefs that I am going to, the hypotheticals that I'm going to use in class. And also, if anybody is interested in teaching themselves, my Burke Scholars teach Blue Book, something that probably many of you don't have any idea what I'm talking about, and that is absolutely fine. You will learn in legal writing, but it's basically citation, how to cite cases. And the Burke Scholars teach the last 10 or 15 minutes of each legal writing class about Blue Book and how to cite within your legal documents. So there's that component too of the student research and helping with professors.
Wonderful. And I'd just like to highlight a couple of ways that I work with students on research, or the many ways that I work with students on research. So one is similar to what some of my colleagues have mentioned. I'm preparing a law review article right now for presentation at a symposium on international law and migration. And I've been for some time developing a project on how international human rights law protects family unity, and that should govern how states develop immigration policy and regulation. It's an exciting project. A student right now is cataloging all of the decisions from the European Court of Human Rights on family unity in the immigration context. What I want to highlight, though, is there are a lot of opportunities like this also in the context of real cases. And that's one of the exciting things about having such a robust experiential curriculum. So the Immigrant Rights Clinic right now has a case pending before the Federal Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit here in Virginia. And that case is all about this really interesting issue about whether a decision by a state to strip its citizens' nationality can give rise to a renewed request for asylum, right? A lot of issues that we deal with in the Immigrant Rights Clinic. And two students have been working with me on this case and have done incredible research to reinforce our legal arguments before the federal court, all about the interaction between international law and domestic immigration law, these same topics that I write about and that I have students research about, but now they're researching them and developing those arguments for a brief to be filed in federal court. So really a wide variety of exciting opportunities. So I have a couple other questions that were circulated in advance of this session. One of them that jumped out at me that I thought was a good one to address is someone asked whether there are opportunities for pro bono work in the area. And I think this is a really interesting question because, as I mentioned, and as you all know, right, Lexington is a fairly rural area. I do think, though, that there is a vibrant legal community in Lexington and more broadly in the Shenandoah Valley. So one organization that I've done a lot of work with and that a lot of my students have interned with, externed with, and engaged with in a variety of capacities is Blue Ridge Legal Services, the regional legal services organization that has an office in Lexington as well as offices in other nearby cities in the Shenandoah Valley. And you know, the range of opportunities that students have engaged with Blue Ridge Legal Services has really run the gamut, but anything from working with children who are seeking protection from turbulent family situations to working with survivors of domestic violence who are trying to escape that situation locally. And so presented some really interesting opportunities for students. I'd ask my co-panelists to share any other ideas that they have or experiences that they know about for pro bono engagement. Professor King?
Sure, there's all kinds of great groups depending on what you're interested in. I mean, the Southern Environmental Law Center, I think that's in Charlottesville, does great work. The Legal Aid Justice Center does more policy kind of work around criminal justice. Of course, there's public defender offices. You got a lot of students who do this CASA program, the Court Appointed Special Advocate program. But really probably the main way that you'll engage with pro bono, most of our students, is through the clinics. You know, in a relatively small community, you know, we've got 6 clinics that about 50 students a year do. So I guess, you know, roughly half the student body will do one of these clinics. And, you know, so the clinics do everything from criminal defense, in my case, to, you know, there's a low-income taxpayer clinic, the immigrant rights clinic, a death penalty clinic, you know, a general civil clinic, and a black lung clinic that works with minors, primarily in West Virginia, getting their benefits. And so those clinics do a ton of pro bono work. You know, it's for academic credit, but a ton of work in the communities around here that need it across all kinds of areas. And then, you know, the externships too. You know, whatever you're interested in that I didn't just mention, we've got externships doing that. And so, you know, there's this summer, you know, employment and internships, and then the stuff for credit. And then there are some students who do this work during the school year. Not as many, but if you want to, you can certainly get involved with any of those organizations I just named. You know, the ACLU, we've had students work there. So there's all kinds of opportunities like that.
Fantastic. Thank you, Professor King. Maybe, you know, as you were talking, there was a question that came in that I think might be interesting to address sort of in the context of this conversation. A prospective student asked, I noticed that 3L offers the opportunity for an externship as in-house counsel. How common, accessible is this opportunity? This prospective student is interested in corporate transactional law within the healthcare or finance setting. Can you describe the opportunities available with this goal in mind? I'll tap Professor Shelby in just a moment, but I do want to just talk a little bit about the range of experiential offerings that we have, and that sort of specifically addressing this question. So we have in the third year a requirement, an actual practice requirement, and that actual practice requirement is an opportunity for students while they are still students to really get out and practice law in an area of interest. And so recognizing that you know, we want to offer more opportunities to our students than just what's accessible locally, we developed a DC program, which now encompasses an opportunity up in Delaware to be working in corporate law directly. And the DC externship is a full credit externship in the fall of your third year. And it really allows a student to identify an opportunity, an area that they want to practice full time, and to get out and practice in that area full time. So students who have transactional and corporate interests have, you know, the entire DC metro area and Delaware now, right, to sort of select from interesting corporate and transactional opportunities that they can engage in. Another thing that I want to emphasize about W&L is, in this regard, our size is a real advantage for students. If we have the opportunity, you are likely able to access that opportunity. And that's just not true at a lot of bigger schools where, you know, they advertise some interesting opportunities, but if you're not the 4 students who get into that opportunity, then you're not going to be able to do that. We've developed our curriculum in a way that students can do what they want to do with some limits, but really we've given a lot over to students in terms of selecting their opportunities and created enough opportunities so that we can accommodate the students that we have here. Professor Shelby, I don't know if you would like to add something in terms of corporate and transactional opportunities.
You know, I don't have much to add. I mean, I have heard really great feedback from a number of students with respect to these programs. And so I've heard great feedback regarding the DC program. This is somewhat related to the question, but we also have a relationship with the Court of Chancery in Delaware, where students are actually able to extern with the courts there, and they have had phenomenal experiences doing that. It's an extremely unique opportunity. And so I have heard positive feedback in that regard, and particularly with respect to the size, where if in fact you're interested and you express that interest, and the opportunity comes to us, usually we could connect those students to these opportunities.
Excellent. And so I actually want to pick up on that last part. Another question that came across in anticipation of this session was specifically about the size. And a student asks, among other things, what's the best part of teaching at a small school? I've spoken to this a little bit. I think that we probably all have something to add. And so I'd like to give my colleagues the opportunity to talk a bit about what they view as the advantages, maybe some of the disadvantages, and how those are mitigated to teaching and, in your case, learning at a small school like W&L. Professor King, would you like to start?
I'll let somebody else go first this time.
Okay. Why don't we start at the end of my list of alphabetical order with Professor Weiss?
Thanks. Okay, good. Well, one thing that so as I mentioned, I've been at Washington and Lee for 2 years now. And what I really love about teaching at such a small school is that, and also a school in a more rural setting where, people spend a lot of time at the school itself, is that students, so I teach, as I mentioned, legal writing. I have required conferences with students every semester. So I see every student in my office, whether they want to or not, but of course they want to, because it's fun and it's legal writing. But what also happens all the time is that students are just in the building And they pass by, you know, my office and stop in often. And I love that. So students, you know, that's part of that is that I teach legal writing, which is small, and it's a very interactive class, and it's year long. So I really get to know the students very well over the course of an entire year. But I have students come, you know, popping into my office very often. And I think that that is unique. I went to law school in New York. And it was, you know, commuter law school, so people are in and out, and there wasn't a sense of community in the same way that I think that there is at Washington and Lee. So that is something that I really love about the school.
Professor Shelby, could I turn to you next?
Absolutely. So prior to coming to W&L, I spent 7 years at DePaul in Chicago, and many of my courses were much larger. So for example, when I taught BA, I had 100, I would constantly have 100 students. And I mean, I would imagine that students had different reactions to the larger class size. On the one hand, it's easier to kind of hide in these larger classes, and you may be on call once for the entire semester, and that's it. You don't have to volunteer. Teaching a large class has its challenges, but in many ways, as a professor for a large class, I'm kind of putting on a show, presenting the material. There's a cohort of students who are actively volunteering, but I got the sense that many students got lost in the shuffle. And so at W&L, I taught the same course and only had about 12 students or so. And so every single student, just about every single student would participate during every single class. And so it definitely seemed as if they were more engaged in the material, they were more engaged in learning. It certainly kept me on my toes as a professor. I felt like I had to be ready for that level of engagement every time I taught the class. And so it enhanced my skill set as an educator to have that sort of class size. And I definitely got to know my students more. It forced me to be more creative about how to structure the courses. But again, as a student, I could see perhaps wanting to have the privilege of hiding in that crowd, but with the smaller class size, you simply don't have that privilege. And perhaps it's not a privilege at all. And it definitely seems like all of the students know one another. I mean, everyone knows one another. My previous institution was more like a commuter school where the students didn't necessarily have to interact with one another, but the students definitely know each other. They rely on each other in a different sort of way. And it seemed as if, and I could be stretching a bit here, so, but it seemed as if they were a little bit like they were more happy because they actually got along with one another, or maybe they were forced to get along with one another, but they certainly interacted at a much higher level with the smaller size.
Thank you, Professor Shelby. Professor King, can I come to you now?
Sure. I agree. It's there's sort of a humanity to the scale of the place, and you know, teaching in a small school with small classes is really incredibly gratifying as a teacher, and it's very unlike my law school experience, which is sort of similar to what we're hearing. You know, I had there's about 350 students per class, and we were just split into 4 sections per 350 students per year, you know. And so my first year, it was just, there was 90 or 95 of us that went from one lecture hall to the other, listening to contracts and crim and constitutional law and whatever else you take. I loved law school, you know, I loved it. It's just a completely different experience from W&L. Like, you know, right now I just finished teaching criminal procedure this morning, and I have 26 students, and it's great. You can have a discussion where you can't do that with 95 students. And then my clinic is 8 students, and all the clinics are 8 students, and that's a fantastic experience. But even more than the class sizes, there is just a humane scale to this place that you can see in the relationships among the students and between students and professors and staff, and you know, there's just the folks around the school. So I agree, it's been a fantastic place for me. I've been here for 12 years now.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much. It looks like we're about out of time for the session. There's just one thing that I wanted to add. that something that I think is important about the size and important for you all to think about. One of, if not the most important thing that you're going to do at law school is develop a professional identity, an idea of who you want to be as a lawyer, and try your best to actually make that a reality, right? And you have 3 years to do that. And in that process, there's a lot of that that's on you, right? In figuring out what kinds of opportunities you want to explore, but it's a lot to deal with alone. And what we have at W&L is a small and intimate and supportive community so that you can rely on professors like myself and my co-panelists in talking with them sort of consistently and openly on an ongoing basis throughout the 3 years so that you can develop a really informed idea of what you want to do and who you want to be as a lawyer. And I think that having the input and support of a faculty like ours in a small setting is a real asset. And I'm glad that you've all spent this time with us on this session to get even just a little feel for that. I really hope that your interest persists and that you reach out to us if you have additional questions. I've already taken us 1 minute over, Dean Rodacker. I apologize. Do you have a couple final words?
No, that's it. Dean Baluarte knows that I am a bit of a stickler when it comes to time for these sessions. So sorry about that. But I hope that if your questions weren't answered, that the discussion continues. Let me or Rachel Hubbard know if you need assistance with getting in touch with anyone. We want you to be at W&L, but we really also want you to make a good decision for yourself. We want you to feel like you made an informed decision and that you're excited about the next 3 years that you have in front of you. So whatever we can do to assist in that process, let us know. Please reach out and have a great day. Be well, and we look forward to hearing more from you. Thank you.
Thanks.